Maxwell Rothschild stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse suite at the Grand Plaza Hotel, his reflection a ghostly overlay on Manhattan's glittering skyline. The crystal tumbler in his hand caught the amber light of dusk, whiskey untouched. Today's board meeting had secured another hostile takeover, adding another company to his growing empire, yet the victory felt hollow. The suite around him, with its carefully curated luxury, seemed to mock him with its emptiness. At 45, Maxwell had everything money could buy, but the gnawing void in his chest only grew deeper with each passing day. His marriage had ended 3 years ago, his ex-wife's parting words still echoing in his mind. "You've turned your heart into a balance sheet, Max. Everything's an asset or liability to you now." A soft knock at the door interrupted his brooding. "Housekeeping," a gentle voice called out. Maxwell glanced at his watch, 7:30 p.m., late for cleaning service. "Come back tomorrow," he called out, irritation edging his voice. "I'm sorry, sir, but there was a mix-up with the schedules. I need to prepare the room for tomorrow's inspection. It will only take a few minutes." Maxwell sighed heavily. "Fine, make it quick." The door opened quietly, and a woman in her early 30s entered, pushing her cleaning cart. She wore the hotel's standard uniform, but there was something striking about her presence, a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her role. Her name tag read, Elena. As she worked efficiently around the room, Maxwell noticed something unusual. Unlike other housekeepers who tried to be invisible, Elena hummed softly while she worked, an old Spanish lullaby that stirred something in his memory. His mother used to sing something similar when he was a child, before the cancer took her. "Could you stop that?" he snapped more harshly than he intended. Elena looked up, startled but not cowed. "I'm sorry, sir. My daughter loves this song. I guess it's become a habit." Her English was perfect, with just a hint of an accent. "Your daughter?" Maxwell found himself asking, despite his usual policy of avoiding personal conversations with service staff. "Yes, sir. Sofia. She's 8. Elena's face softened with pride. "She wants to be a doctor someday. Quite the dreamer, my little girl." Something in her tone made Maxwell turn fully away from the window. Elena was making his bed with practiced efficiency, but there was a grace to her movements, a contentment that seemed out of place, given her circumstances. "A doctor? That's quite ambitious for—" He trailed off, catching himself before completing the condescending remark. "For a housekeeper's daughter," Elena finished, meeting his eyes with quiet confidence. "Perhaps, but I believe dreams don't check your bank account before choosing you." The simple wisdom in her words struck him like a physical blow. When was the last time he dreamed of anything beyond quarterly profits and market share? "How do you do it?" The question escaped before he could stop it. "Do what, sir? Seem so content. You're working late hours, cleaning up after others, and yet you're humming and smiling like you've won the lottery." Elena smoothed the last wrinkle from his bedspread and straightened up. "Maybe I have, sir. I have a healthy daughter who fills my life with purpose. I have work that, while not glamorous, helps provide for her future. And every night, I get to go home to a small apartment filled with more love than any mansion could hold." She moved to gather her supplies, then paused at the door. "You know, Mr. Rothschild, I clean many rooms in this hotel. The richest guests often leave the biggest mess, as if they're trying to fill something empty inside them. Maybe what they're looking for isn't found in the penthouse suites." Before Maxwell could respond, she was gone, leaving him with only the lingering echo of her lullaby and thoughts he couldn't shake. He walked to his desk, where the takeover contracts lay waiting for his signature, papers that would put hundreds out of work in the name of efficiency. For the first time in years, his hand hesitated over the dotted line. Elena's words had cracked something in his carefully constructed worldview, letting in a sliver of doubt. What was he really building? And at what cost? His phone buzzed, another message from the board about tomorrow's meetings. But Maxwell found himself thinking about a little girl he'd never met, who dared to dream of becoming a doctor, and her mother who cleaned hotel rooms with the dignity of a queen. Outside his window, the city lights continued their eternal dance, but tonight they seemed to be telling a different story, one about the true meaning of wealth and the treasures that couldn't be counted in a ledger. The next morning, Maxwell found himself distracted during the board meeting. Instead of focusing on profit projections, his mind kept drifting to Elena's words. The conference room's stark modernism, once a source of pride, now felt sterile and lifeless compared to the warmth in that simple housekeeper's voice. Mr. Rothschild, his CFO's voice cut through his thoughts. The layoff numbers for the Anderson merger. Maxwell looked down at the documents before him, cold statistics representing lives about to be upended. 342 positions marked for elimination. He'd approved similar cuts dozens of times before, but today each number seemed to have a face. "I need time to review these figures," he said, standing abruptly. "We'll reconvene tomorrow." Ignoring the surprised murmurs, Maxwell left the boardroom. Instead of returning to his office, he found himself walking through the hotel's service corridors, areas he'd never bothered to notice before. The stark contrast between the hotel's opulent public spaces and these utilitarian passages struck him forcefully. He found Elena in the laundry room, sorting sheets with the same careful attention she'd shown in his suite. When she saw him, surprise flickered across her face, but she didn't stop working. "Mr. Rothschild? Is something wrong with your room?" "No, I wanted to ask you something." He hesitated, feeling strangely uncertain. "Would you have coffee with me?" Elena's hands stilled on the sheets. "That wouldn't be appropriate, sir. There are rules about staff fraternizing with guests." "Please," Maxwell heard himself say, a word that rarely crossed his lips. "I need to understand something." Perhaps it was the unfamiliar vulnerability in his voice, but Elena studied him for a long moment before nodding. "My break is in 15 minutes. There's a small diner around the corner." The diner was a world away from Maxwell's usual haunts: formica tables, vinyl seats, and coffee that cost less than the hand sanitizer in his car. Elena sat across from him, her uniform incongruous in the morning crowd of construction workers and office clerks. "Your daughter," Maxwell began, "the one who wants to be a doctor. How do you do it? Support her dreams when—" He trailed off, realizing how condescending he might sound. "When I'm just a housekeeper," Elena finished, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You know, Mr. Rothschild, before I cleaned hotel rooms, I was a nurse in Venezuela. I had a good life, a career I loved. Then the economy collapsed and everything changed." Maxwell leaned forward, his own coffee untouched. "What happened?" "Life happened. Revolution. Inflation. The hospital where I worked couldn't pay its staff. Basic medicines became luxury items. I watched patients die from preventable causes because we lacked supplies." Her eyes grew distant. "When Sofia was born, I knew I had to leave. Coming to America meant starting over, taking whatever work I could find." "But you could have found something better than housekeeping with your background." Elena's smile held a gentle rebuke. "Better. I make an honest living, Mr. Rothschild. My daughter has food on her table, books for school, and a mother who comes home every night. We have enough. What's better than that?" Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "Emergency board meeting called. Shareholders concerned about merger delay." "I have to go," he said, standing reluctantly, "but I'd like to continue this conversation. There's something I need your help with." Elena looked skeptical. "I'm not sure what help I could offer someone like you." "Tomorrow? Same time?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow. But Mr. Rothschild, whatever you're looking for, remember, sometimes the answers we need aren't the ones we want to hear." Back in his office, Maxwell faced the merger documents again. But now, mixed with the financial projections, he saw other images. Elena's hands carefully sorting sheets. Her quiet pride when speaking of her daughter, the dignity with which she approached work, others might consider beneath them. His intercom buzzed. "Sir, the board is waiting." Maxwell straightened his tie and gathered the papers. But as he walked to the boardroom, he found himself thinking about a different kind of wealth, one that couldn't be measured in stock prices or profit margins. The board members fell silent as he entered, Thomas Blackwood, his longest-serving director, spoke first. "Maxwell, we're concerned about your hesitation. The Anderson merger is time-sensitive. Any delay could cost us millions." "Cost us?" Maxwell repeated softly. "Tell me, Thomas, what's the true cost of what we do here?" The room grew tense. Maxwell had built his empire on being ruthlessly decisive. This philosophical questioning was unprecedented and, to his board, deeply troubling. "Perhaps you need a break, Maxwell," suggested Sarah Chen, another director. "The pressure of these deals can be overwhelming." Maxwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No break needed, Sarah. In fact, I think I'm finally waking up. I want a full impact analysis of the merger, not just financial projections, but human costs, community effects, long-term consequences." "That's not how we operate," Thomas protested. "The market doesn't care about—" "Then maybe it's time we taught it to care," Maxwell interrupted. "Either we do this my way, or we don't do it at all." As his words hung in the air, Maxwell felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of fighting for something more meaningful than money. But he also saw the calculating looks exchanged between board members, and he knew that his awakening conscience might come at a price he wasn't yet prepared to pay. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Maxwell researched Elena's homeland, reading about Venezuela's economic collapse and its aftermath. He found himself wondering about the lives behind the statistics, the stories of people like Elena who had lost everything but somehow kept their humanity intact. His phone buzzed again, more urgent messages about the merger, about shareholder concerns, about his unusual behavior. But for the first time in decades, Maxwell Rothschild was beginning to question whether the path to redemption might require losing everything he thought he'd valued. The next morning, Maxwell arrived at the diner early, his mind heavy with decisions he needed to make. Through the window, he watched Elena approach, her uniform exchanged for simple civilian clothes. She looked different outside of work, more relaxed, yet somehow more dignified. "You look troubled," she said, sliding into the booth. "The board is fighting my decision to review the merger's human impact." Maxwell rubbed his temples. "They're threatening to call a special shareholders meeting. I could lose control of my company." Elena's expression remained neutral. "And this surprises you? You built an empire on profits over people. Mr. Rothschild, did you expect them to change just because you did?" Her directness startled him. "You don't pull punches, do you? In my experience, truth is like medicine. Sometimes the bitter taste is necessary for healing." Before they could continue, a small commotion at the diner's entrance drew their attention. A young girl burst in, wearing a backpack too large for her small frame, her face bright with excitement. "Mama!" she called out, rushing to their table. "Mrs. Peterson let me borrow a real stethoscope today. I listened to Tommy's heart in science class and—" She stopped abruptly, noticing Maxwell. "Sofia," Elena said softly, "this is Mr. Rothschild. He's a guest at the hotel." Maxwell watched as the girl's expression shifted from excitement to something more guarded. She had Elena's eyes, but there was a spark in them that reminded him of himself at that age, before life had taught him to value spreadsheets over dreams. "Hello, Sofia," he said, trying to smile naturally. "Your mother tells me you want to be a doctor." "Yes, sir," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I'm going to help people, like Mama used to in Venezuela." A shadow crossed Elena's face. "Sofia, mija, why aren't you at the after-school program? It's closed." "Mama, they said something about funding cuts." Sofia's voice trembled slightly. "Mrs. Peterson said she'd watch me, but she got sick and—" "Dios mío," Elena muttered, checking her watch. "My shift starts in 20 minutes, and Maria can't babysit today." Maxwell saw the worry lines deepen around Elena's eyes. This was her reality, the daily struggle of balancing work and single parenthood, with no safety net to catch her if she fell. "I can help," he offered, surprising himself. "I have a conference room at the hotel. Sofia could do her homework there while you work. My assistant could keep an eye on her." "Absolutely not," Elena said firmly. I don't need charity, Mr. Rothschild. It's not charity, it's... He paused, searching for the right words. It's an investment in the future, in a doctor who might change the world someday. Sofia's eyes lit up, but Elena remained hesitant. Mr. Rothschild, please, he interrupted. Call me Maxwell. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. For a moment, Maxwell saw himself through Elena's eyes, a wealthy man playing at redemption, perhaps, but one who was genuinely trying to change. All right, Elena finally agreed, just for today. But as they left the diner, none of them noticed the man taking photos with his phone from a corner booth. Later that afternoon, Maxwell sat in his office, watching through the glass wall as Sofia worked on her homework in the conference room. She had spread her books across the massive mahogany table where million-dollar deals were usually negotiated, her small figure a stark contrast to the room's corporate grandeur. His phone buzzed, Thomas Blackwood's number. Maxwell! Thomas's voice was cold. Care to explain why you're consorting with hotel staff? The board has concerns about your recent behavior, but this is beyond unprofessional. Maxwell's blood ran cold. You're having me followed. We're protecting the company's interests. Your erratic behavior, the delayed merger, and now this inappropriate relationship with a housekeeper. The shareholders won't stand for it. There's nothing inappropriate. Save it, Thomas cut him off. Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I suggest you come prepared to explain yourself. And Maxwell, leave the maid and her kid out of it. People like them don't belong in our world. The line went dead, leaving Maxwell staring at his reflection in the window. In the conference room, Sofia was holding up a paper, beaming with pride at solving a math problem. She reminded him so much of himself at that age, before money and power had become his only measures of success. His intercom buzzed. Sir, Ms. Rivera is here to collect her daughter. Elena entered his office, still in her uniform after her shift. Her eyes immediately went to Sofia, softening at the sight of her daughter, happily engaged in her studies. Thank you, she said quietly. This meant a lot to her. Maxwell stood, his decision crystallizing. Elena, there's something you need to know. The board, they're not happy about our friendship. They might try to cause trouble for you at the hotel. Elena's expression hardened. I see. So this is where it ends? Where you remember your place and I remember mine? No, Maxwell said firmly. This is where I decide what kind of man I really am. The board meets tomorrow to discuss my future with the company. I'd like you to be there. Why? Because sometimes the wealthy need to be reminded what true riches look like. He glanced at Sofia through the glass. And because your daughter deserves to see that dreams don't have to die just because the world says they should. Elena studied him for a long moment. You could lose everything. Maxwell smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Or I might finally find what I've been looking for. As Elena and Sofia left the office, Maxwell turned to his computer. He had a long night ahead, preparing for a battle that would define not just his future, but his very identity. The empire he'd built might crumble, but standing in its ruins, he might finally become the man he was meant to be. The city lights flickered outside his window, but for once, their golden glow didn't remind him of wealth and power. Instead, they spoke of possibility, of dreams waiting to be born, and of a different kind of treasure, one that had been hidden in plain sight all along. The morning of the board meeting dawned cold and grey. Maxwell stood in his office, adjusting his tie as he watched the board members file into the conference room. Each face held a mixture of disappointment and determination. They'd come for blood, and they expected him to yield, as he'd always taught them to do with hostile takeovers. Elena arrived precisely at 9, wearing a simple but elegant dress instead of her uniform. The security guard almost stopped her, but Maxwell had left explicit instructions. As she entered the boardroom, the conversation died, replaced by scandalized whispers. Maxwell, Thomas Blackwood stood, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is a closed board meeting. Your friend cannot be here. Ms. Rivera stays. Maxwell said firmly, taking his place at the head of the table. "She's here because you all need to hear what real wealth sounds like." Sarah Chen cleared her throat delicately. "We've prepared the necessary documentation to transfer control of operations, Maxwell. Given your recent instability, we believe it's in everyone's best interest if you step down temporarily." Maxwell smiled, but there was steel in his expression. "Before you attempt this coup, I suggest you look at the folders in front of you." The board members exchanged glances before opening the manila folders placed at each seat. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, images of empty factory towns where their corporate raiders had stripped companies bare, statistics showing the human cost of their efficiency measures, and most damning of all, proof of their own misdeeds, the corners they'd cut, the lives they'd ruined in pursuit of profit. "What is this?" Thomas demanded, his face flushing. "That," Maxwell said quietly, "is our legacy, the real cost of our success." He stood, walking around the table slowly. "For years, I led this company believing that profit was the only measure of worth. I told myself we were creating value, but look at these pictures. Look at the communities we've destroyed, the families we've torn apart." "This is business," Sarah protested. The market, Elena spoke for the first time, her voice clear and strong, "is not an excuse for losing our humanity." All eyes turned to her. In her simple dress, she should have seemed out of place in this room of power suits and seven-figure salaries. Instead, she radiated a dignity that made their expensive clothes look like costumes. "When your company's efficiency measures shut down the hospital where I worked in Venezuela," she continued, "I watched children die because we couldn't afford medicine. When you buy companies just to strip them for parts, real people lose their homes, their dreams, their hope. I clean your rooms, and I see how you live, surrounded by luxury but empty inside, always chasing more, never finding enough." The silence that followed her words was deafening. Maxwell watched his board members shift uncomfortably, seeing perhaps for the first time the true reflection of their actions. "I'm not stepping down," Maxwell declared, "but I am making changes. The Anderson merger is cancelled." "You can't do that!" Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "The shareholders will receive a full report of our past practices unless they support these changes." Maxwell finished calmly. "Starting today, Rothschild Enterprises will operate differently. We'll focus on sustainable growth, community investment, and ethical business practices." "You'll destroy everything we've built," Sarah warned. "No," Maxwell corrected her. "I'll transform it into something worth building." He pressed a button on the conference phone. "Send them in, please." The doors opened, and a stream of people entered, former employees from companies they'd dismantled, community leaders from towns they'd affected, and finally Sofia, carrying her backpack and medical textbook. "These are the people we've ignored," Maxwell said softly. "The ones whose lives we've treated as numbers on a spreadsheet. Starting today, they'll have a voice in how we operate." Sofia walked to her mother's side, her young face serious but unafraid. Looking at them, Maxwell felt a certainty he'd never known in all his years of corporate conquests. "You have a choice," he told his board. "Stay and be part of this transformation, or leave with your golden parachutes. But understand this, the old way of doing business ends today." Thomas stood, his face red with fury. "This is suicide. You're throwing away billions on some misguided crusade because a maid made you feel guilty." "No." Maxwell's voice was quiet but firm. "I'm choosing to be rich in the things that matter." He looked at Elena and Sofia, seeing in them all the possibilities he'd forgotten existed. Sometimes the greatest wealth comes from what we give, not what we take. One by one, board members made their choices. Some stormed out, others sat back down, uncertainty warring with curiosity on their faces. Through it all, Elena stood tall, her presence a reminder of the dignity that no amount of money could buy. As the room slowly emptied of those unwilling to change, Maxwell felt lighter, freer than he had in decades. He looked at the remaining board members, seeing in their eyes the same awakening he'd experienced. "Now," he said, "let's talk about how we can use our resources to make a real difference." Sofia raised her hand, her eyes bright with possibility. "Mr. Rothschild, could you help rebuild the hospital where my mom used to work?" Maxwell met Elena's gaze, seeing in it a mixture of pride, hope, and something else, something that made his heart beat faster. "That," he said softly, "sounds like an excellent place to start." But as they began to discuss their new direction, none of them noticed Thomas Blackwood in the hallway, his face dark with revenge as he dialed a number. "Get me everything you can find on Elena Rivera," he hissed into the phone. Everything. The war for the soul of Rothschild Enterprises had been won, but a more personal battle was about to begin, one that would test not just Maxwell's newfound principles, but the very foundations of his transformation. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Maxwell sat in his office reviewing plans for the Venezuelan hospital restoration project. The evening sun cast long shadows across his desk, where architectural drawings shared space with Sofia's carefully drawn pictures of what she thought a dream hospital should look like. Her childish sketches, full of bright colors and hope, had somehow captured the essence of what they were trying to achieve better than any professional rendering. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered, her face concerned. "Sir, you need to see this." She handed him a tablet displaying tomorrow's business news headlines, already circulating online. "Rothschild Enterprises CEO's immigrant scandal. Questions arise about relationship with undocumented housekeeper." Maxwell's heart stopped. Thomas Blackwood's revenge had arrived. The article detailed Elena's history, twisting her escape from Venezuela's collapse into something sinister. It questioned her immigration status, implied impropriety in her relationship with Maxwell, and even cast doubt on Sofia's educational status. Every paragraph was crafted to destroy not just Elena's reputation, but her entire life in America. His phone buzzed, Elena calling. "Maxwell?" Her voice was tight with controlled fear. "Immigration officers are at my apartment. Sofia's scared. I don't know." "Don't move," he interrupted, already grabbing his coat. "I'm coming." The drive to Elena's modest apartment complex was the longest 20 minutes of his life. When he arrived, 2 government vehicles were parked outside, their official presence casting a shadow darker than the gathering dusk. Elena opened the door at his knock, her face pale but composed. Sofia clung to her side, eyes wide with fear. Inside, 2 immigration officers sat on their worn couch. While Thomas Blackwood stood by the window, a smile of smug satisfaction on his face. "How kind of you to join us, Maxwell," Thomas said smoothly. "I was just explaining to these gentlemen how our company recently discovered some irregularities in Ms. Rivera's documentation. The only irregularity here is your presence." "Thomas," Maxwell turned to the officers. "Gentlemen, I'm Maxwell Rothschild. Before we continue, I'd like you to see something." He pulled out his phone, bringing up emails and documents he'd hoped never to need. "These are records of every illegal action Thomas Blackwood has taken in the past decade. Corporate espionage, insider trading, environmental violations, enough to keep your entire department busy for years." Thomas's smile faltered. "You're bluffing. Try me." Maxwell's voice was steel. "I've already sent copies to every major news outlet set to release if anything happens to Elena or Sofia. Is revenge really worth prison time, Thomas?" The officers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the corporate drama unfolding before them. Maxwell pressed his advantage. "Furthermore, I have here," he produced a folder from his briefcase, "complete documentation of Ms. Rivera's legal status, including her approved asylum application and work permits. She fled political persecution in Venezuela, a fact that Thomas here conveniently omitted when he called you." The senior officer reviewed the documents carefully. "These appear to be in order. Ms. Rivera, I apologize for any distress we've caused. Mr. Blackwood suggested there was some urgency to investigate." "He was mistaken," Maxwell said firmly, "and I believe he was just leaving." Thomas straightened his tie, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "This isn't over, Maxwell." "Actually, it is." Maxwell held up his phone again. "Leave Elena and Sofia alone, or every dirty secret you've ever tried to hide goes public. Your choice." After the officers and Thomas left, the small apartment felt suddenly quiet. Sofia had fallen asleep on the couch, emotionally exhausted. Elena stood by the window, watching the government vehicles drive away. "You kept documentation of everything?" she asked softly. "All this time? In my business, you learned to keep insurance." Maxwell moved to stand beside her. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd target a simple housekeeper." She turned to face him, and he was struck by the strength in her eyes. "I learned long ago that powerful men are most dangerous when they feel threatened. But you're different now. Because of you," he said simply. "You and Sofia showed me what really matters. I'd give up everything, the company, the wealth, all of it, before I'd let anyone hurt you." Elena studied his face in the gathering darkness. "You already did give it up in a way. The Maxwell Rothschild I first met would never have risked his empire for a housekeeper and her daughter. The Maxwell Rothschild you first met was a poor man pretending to be rich." He took her hand gently. "Elena, She pressed a finger to his lips. "Wait, before you say anything else, you should know I'm not looking for a savior. Sofia and I have survived on our own this long." "I know," he smiled. "That's one of the things I love about you. You don't need me, but I need you, both of you. You've taught me what real wealth is, what real strength looks like. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend the rest of my life learning more." Sofia stirred on the couch, blinking sleepily. "Mama, are the scary men gone?" Elena went to her daughter, smoothing her hair. "Yes, Mija, they're gone. Everything's okay now. Mr. Rothschild." Sofia's voice was small. "Are you going to stay?" Maxwell looked at Elena, seeing in her eyes the same question her daughter asked so innocently. "If your mother agrees, I'd like that very much." Elena's smile was like sunrise after a long night. "I think we'd like that too." 6 months later, the Venezuelan hospital project was nearly complete. Maxwell stood with Elena and Sofia on the roof of the newly renovated building, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors no penthouse view could match. Sofia wore a child-sized white coat, a gift from the medical staff who had already adopted her as their future colleague. She had spent the day following doctors on their rounds, her dream of becoming a physician more alive than ever. "Look," Elena pointed to the hospital's new sign, "the Rivera Rothschild Medical Center." "A perfect combination," Maxwell said softly, his arm around her waist. "Just like us." Elena leaned into him, watching their daughter excitedly discuss medical procedures with a young doctor. "You know, when you first started talking to me in that hotel room, I thought you were just another rich man playing games." "I was," he admitted, "until you showed me what true riches look like." Sofia ran back to them, her face glowing with excitement. "Mama, Dr. Ramirez says I can come back tomorrow to learn about pediatrics. Can we stay longer?" Maxwell exchanged glances with Elena. "Actually, I was thinking we might stay permanently. The hospital needs good administrators, and your mother was an excellent nurse. And you, young lady, could study with some of the best doctors in South America." "But what about your company?" Elena asked. Maxwell smiled. "The board can handle things in New York. I've learned there are more important things than running an empire. Sometimes the greatest treasures are found in the simplest moments, like watching a little girl's dreams come true." As the sun set over the city, Maxwell Rothschild, once the coldest corporate raider on Wall Street, held his newfound family close. In the end, he discovered that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or stock prices, but in the love of a woman strong enough to stand her ground and the dreams of a little girl brave enough to reach for the stars. The hospital lights came on, a beacon of hope in the gathering dusk. Inside its walls, lives would be saved, dreams would be born, and a new generation of healers would learn that sometimes the richest people are those who give the most away. And in that moment, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found his heart's hidden treasure, not in the penthouse suites or boardrooms of his past, but in the simple, profound joy of building something that would truly last. What would you do if you had to choose between keeping your empire and following your heart? Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed your perspective on what truly matters in life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story could inspire others who might be facing similar crossroads in their lives. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support keeps us going, allowing us to bring you powerful, life-changing stories every single day. Each subscription helps us continue our mission of sharing these emotional journeys that remind us what truly matters in life. And if you're looking for another powerful story that will touch your soul just as deeply, check out the video appearing on the left of your screen right now. Trust me, you won't want to miss this incredible journey of transformation that will leave you thinking about it for days. Remember, by joining our community, you're not just watching stories, you're becoming part of a family that believes in the power of human connection and transformation. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue this amazing journey together. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. We'll see you in the next video.